So our next panel before we break for lunch is going to be moderated by, Patrick Humm. He's the founder and chairman and president of High Electronics Products. His products include the Terra Nimbus Terra Stack solution for next generation data specifically serving the emerging active archive that also being called the cold storage market. I think there's an exhibit out there of it, so you can take a look at that. Prior to founding High Electronics, Mr. Humm spent his career with Texas Instruments in various IT and international management roles, including the following roles which held worldwide responsibility, semiconductor manufacturing inventory manager, IT technical architecture director, semiconductor manufacturing. I guess I'm reading this over again. During his TI career, which included 10 years of international assignments in Japan, Singapore, and Italy. And with that, Pat, and your panel. You're welcome.
Good morning, and thank you, Rose. General Williams, we're glad to be here. This morning, our panel is going to discuss tools to protect your digital data, finding the right approach. First, I'd like to introduce the panel. We've got a very distinguished panel. I'd like to start with Ovie Carrol, who is the second from the right end of the table. Ovie has 27 years of experience in law enforcement. He is the director of the Department of Justice Cyber Lab in D.C. He speaks widely on the subject. He's also an instructor and co-author of the SANS Institute training program for cyber professionals, and that's got a lot of very good public tools available that can be accessed. He's an adjunct professor at George Washington University. He specializes in internet investigations, interview techniques, and interrogation. He was a special agent in charge for computer crime unit investigations at the U.S. Postal Service, and he was the computer intrusion expert at the Postal Service as well. Mr. Carrol has served as Chief Computer Investigations and Operations for the Air Force Special Investigations Unit, and he's coordinated national computer intrusion investigations occurring within the Air Force. He's recently returning from talking to some of our major domestic suppliers of encryption and other secure mobile devices. Thank you for joining us this morning, Ovie. Thank you. My next panelist is Robert Wallace, and he's in the middle. And Robert is the Director of Security Investigations for PricewaterhouseCoopers. Mr. Wallace is the Cybercrime and Data Breach Response Practice Leader in the Dallas Forensics Lab. He's worked at Pricewaterhouse for 10 years, focusing on digital forensics, incident response, electronic investigations throughout a variety of industries, and specializes in working on large-scale breach response cases. And I recently caught him somewhere in an undisclosed location, and he interrupted his duties to talk to me for a few minutes. So he is out there right on the front lines. Our next speaker is Mr. Joe Shaw with Alvarez and Marsal. He's the manager of their Global Forensic and Dispute Services. He's located here in Dallas. Mr. Shaw has a broad range of expertise in multiple areas of computer security, including live systems forensics, so that mean time to detection metric. Joe is an expert in getting there fast. He also studies malware, reverse engineering of malware, as well as viruses and other breach techniques. And he's an expert in risk assessment, vulnerability assessment and remediation, log analysis, and security information, and he has 18 years of experience. He's an instructor at A&M's training division and teaches courses in to friendly foreign governments through the U.S. Department of State programs. He is a co-author of 3 books and technology publications, recently published, by the way, with McGraw-Hill and another major publishing outlet. Mike Saylor is the second from the end of the table, and Mike is the executive director of the Cyber Defense Lab at UT Dallas. He's a member of the North Texas FBI InfraGard. He has been an active member of the North Texas Crime Commission and our Cybercrime Committee. He's got 19 years of U.S. and worldwide experience in security and investigation work, doing technology risk management, enterprise security, incident response, fraud, investigation, digital forensics, project management training, and process and policy development. He's a professor of computer science at the Dallas Community College District, where he chairs their technology advisory board. He's also investigated multi-million-dollar fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, hacking, and racketeering. Our last panel member you've already met, which is Nilo Castillo. He's vice president of the CyberSecurity group, and he's located here in Dallas as well. Nilo is a co-founder of that group, and it specializes in cybersecurity and cyber intelligence. He has 20 years of experience in security and sales management with companies like IBM, Computer Associates, and he has done international training in cybersecurity investigations. He's a frequent speaker, and out of all of us in front of you, I think maybe the only one in the room that does not have a picture on the internet that I can find. And I looked hard. He's very proud of that fact, by the way.
Yes.
So I'd like to start with our first slide. Where'd the clicker go? They'll do it in the back for me, okay? So I want to frame the discussion this morning with just a small introduction. By 2020, we will have 350 zettabytes of data in the digital universe. To store that data will require, we'll have 35 zettabytes of data, and we'll need 350 billion 10 terabyte hard drives with no redundancy to store that information. Next slide. To address data growth and the issues associated with keeping all of those bits secure, we will have an annual spend by the end of the decade of $155 billion on security tools. Next slide. Good cybersecurity requires good people and good architectures. The key thing is to detect, prevent, predict, contain, and respond. This is a Gartner graphic. There are a lot of good frameworks out there that you can adopt from NIST and other national security information agencies and government entities. The next slide, please. So this is an example, and I discussed this with the Verizon representative who's with us this afternoon. And it's a visualization of the breach vectors that we're seeing in the environment today. Those are cyber espionage, denial of service, crimeware, web app attacks, payment card skimming, physical loss, where actually computers are stolen, miscellaneous errors, insider abuse, and the recent most dominant attack vector, of course, is point of sale intrusions. Examples are Target, Home Depot, P.F. Chang, and so many others. So there were 4,500 incidents that were analyzed, and these were the typical consolidated profiles that can result in better tool application and focused defense. Next slide. So you can study the social networks within your organization and see who's doing what, when, and where, and how, with other security tools that you can, of course, source from the industry. Next slide. So people, processes, government regulation, and a hardened infrastructure. I want us to focus in on our panel discussion on how all of these work together to provide better economic security and national security for our country. With that said, I would like to say one last word about industrial systems like SCADA systems and factory, plant, utilities, electrical facilities, power plants. Many of those facilities are some of our poorest protected information systems. They may be based upon older operating systems and platforms. Many of them still run on Windows XP. So as C-suite executives, we need to focus on the need to upgrade those old systems so that we don't end up having incidents that are exacerbated, like the explosion at the West Chemical Plant and others that could take down significant parts of our national infrastructure. With that said, I'm going to get on to the questions that we've formulated for you, and hopefully we'll have a good discussion. Thank you for joining us this morning. First question is going to go to Joe with Alvarez and Marsal. What tools, people, skills, processes, hardware and software should be deployed prior to an event to protect and detect, prevent, and then what tools should be bought?
Okay, so the previous presenter talked about how long SQL injection had been going on and since 1999. Buffer overflows are even older than that. We still face many of the same problems that we have for the last 2 decades now in information security. And so the tools that are out there, the baseline that everyone should have, I mean, having your perimeter firewalls. Everyone's really good at perimeter defense these days. But so they've got their firewalls, they've got their intrusion detection or prevention devices. People are starting to deploy advanced attack detection tools like FireEye. You see those things deployed. Security intelligence, so being able to take all of those devices and plug them into like a log management or a SEM solution. So not only are you using those tools, but having those tools give you usable intelligence, knowing what's going on. I mean, the SEM will act as a way to consolidate all that information. One of the bigger issues is that people don't seem to be very good at getting rid of the noise with their tools. So just having the tools isn't enough. You have to have processes and procedures in place. You need to hire the people that understand the tools, understand how to make them useful. You need to have people with a broad range of skills. You need to have analytic skills, so being able to find patterns in static beyond what your SEM's identifying. You need to have people who can do very technical work. And if, so low-level malware analysis, if that's something you face every day, and I think most companies do, they just don't realize it. You need to find log management. I mean, it may make sense for your company to outsource that work or not to outsource that work. There are huge skill gaps, as Dr. Chang mentioned this morning. His figure of 1,000 people qualified to do this type of work may be a little low, but I don't think it's too far off the mark. And there need to be many more people. And organizations provide that sort of training, SANS, et cetera. Security is a frontline skill that everyone in an organization needs to have. So it's not something you can just have your organization, you can't have like a security czar who sets a top-down policy and then everything is just sort of left to him or her and no one else. But you need to have your low-level people understand the security risks, the implications, who the threats are, what the exploits are, all of those things. As Mr. South pointed out, security without intelligence is difficult. So you need to have intelligence that you can rely on, whether it's industry-related intelligence, whether it's just what's going on in the internet as a whole. The skills, people need to understand risk. Business is about risk, and everyone needs to understand it, from your C-level executives all the way down to the frontline employees. Processes, you need to have vulnerability assessment processes. You need to have system hardening processes. I mean, you need to have processes that encompass the entire life cycle of IT, from system implementation to system retirement. What data is on those systems? How are you retiring it? I mean, it's a very broad range of activities that need to happen from beginning to end of life cycle management to keep those things alive and going, and to keep your data safe, your intellectual property safe, your customer data safe.
Thank you. I'd like to move to the next question, which will go to Nilo, which is, do organizations need security awareness training? What should that content look like, and how often should it be conducted?
Training is essential to your company, to any company. It is vital. Your employees must know not to click on any given link to make sure that they don't fall prey to social engineering, phishing scams, not to connect USB drives that they find on the parking lot. A lack of security training can be devastating to your company. The consequences could drive you out of business. And yesterday I read that a recent study indicates that 55% of employees have not received any security training. 55%. Let me explain that so you could, what I call real life. So you spend thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars, some of you, buying all this software and hardware, and all it takes is one employee, and your security just went out the window. Let me give you a couple of possible scenarios. I sent an email to a group of your employees. I've been told many times, my employees will not click on any link that you send. That might be true. But if I send an attachment and I call that attachment employee salary, I guarantee you all I need is one person, and it happens every single time. I mentioned USB flash drive. We all know not to plug it in. But if we buy 10, 15 brand new USB flash drive, we open the package, we install software, we seal the package, and I drop it on your parking garage. I drop 10 or 15. Again, I guarantee you that someone will plug in that flash drive. And there's software on that flash drive that will not be detected by all the hardware and software that you have purchased. So once again, it is very, very simple to commit a data breach. You have to make sure that your employees are very much aware of when to open a link attachment to make sure they don't fall for social engineering. One of the biggest that just happened last week, one of the banks, millions of dollars worth of hardware and software. And the CEO went on PR and said they're going to double their cybersecurity, the amount of money that they're going to spend on cybersecurity. But what he didn't tell you was that with all that, the monies that they have spent, they fell to social engineering. One simple phone call, they were able to get some user ID and password. So they spend all this time to build your perimeter, your wall, your castle, and then you forget about the people inside. So to answer the other questions, you have to bring your people and get their cooperation when it comes to security training. You also have to hold them accountable. And you have to test them every couple of months. I know, and Mike has done it, I have done it. We go into a company, we do security training, and we send emails a couple of weeks later, and we get them. And we just told them a couple of weeks ago not to click on the emails. And by the way, this includes CEOs too, by the way. But the USB flash drive, employee salary list, 100% guarantee that somebody's going to open it. It's human nature. So test your people, bring somebody from outside to run the test, because quite frankly, the internal people are doing a great job, but you also need another set of eyes to make sure that everything is done correctly.
Thank you, Nilo. Mike, would you like to add anything to that?
Absolutely, and Nilo touched on it. A lot of times when we talk about doing awareness and security training in organizations, a lot of that focuses on employees, where in actuality a lot of the problem is at the management and executive level. You know, if any of you have military experience, the officers and generals get to do whatever they want, and they cause most of the problem on those types of classified networks. It's not much different in corporate world, in the private sector. We do a lot of training. We've spent a lot of effort teaching people what not to do, and then there's always the exception. The owner's brother, the executive of marketing needs to go to a certain website. You know, whatever the case is, there's always exceptions. Exceptions are vulnerabilities, and if we don't educate from the top down, the people at the bottom aren't going to see the leadership and the reason to comply. A lot of policies, procedures, and situations don't have good consequences. People aren't getting fired because they accidentally introduced a virus or accidentally shared their password or left their password out. So a lot of what Nilo talked about, consequences, education, it has to be part of the culture. It can't be a one-time, once a year. Yes, I think I heard about security and orientation. I've been here for 20 years. But it has to be part of the culture. When people build new products, when changes are made to the environment, when new tools and software and people are introduced, security has to be a component of all those activities. It really does have to be part of the culture. It's not a project, it's a process.
Thank you, Mike. Ovie, what are the phases and timelines of an investigation and prosecution? What tools are best used when? For detection, analysis, breach response, prosecution? What skills should be mandatory, internal, external? How quickly should external experts be called in?
Wow, that's quite a bit.
Well,
So let me start with the easiest. What is the best prosecution tool? It's called, maybe you haven't heard of it, but it's called the Candy Camilla tool. It's your local U.S. Attorney's Office. That's the best tool. As far as the phases that we talk about, one of the first things that I'd like to say is that we've all probably heard of APT, the Advanced Persistent Threat. But what we need to be more focused on is probably APA or APR, Advanced Persistent Assessment and Response. And when I say assessment and response, is we're assessing our own internal security. And it's not just the normal assessment that your IT staff is conducting. That's absolutely needed on an ongoing basis. But I think that we all have to realize that there could be a perception of a conflict of interest, your own internal IT staff doing that assessment, because they're also charged with making it secure. So I think it's of great value bringing in, and I say this as a government guy, so I have no motivation other than what I've seen, is to bring in that external assessment team to actually do an assessment. And when I do talk about assessment, most pen testing, most assessments are conducted from outside in. They assess how difficult would it be to get into your infrastructure. And I think we're missing a really valuable point, which is, I love the conversation I've been hearing so far today, which is you have to assume that you are going to be compromised. And so why aren't we doing an assessment from inside out? Once an intruder gains access to your infrastructure, you need to have already done an assessment to say, what access will they have? Once they're inside, what access will they really have? Have you made it difficult for them to move around laterally? And I don't know if you want to consider the use of abnormal ports or protocols, things so that once they do get in, it's not just a standard lateral movement. We need to know how easy is it going to be for them to gain access to our valuable secrets, our customer data, and make it difficult for them to egress. Now, whether that's really aggressive egress filtering, two-factor authentication, throughout, all of that needs to be assessed. And then we've also heard, Nilo, I love what you talked about, I refer to as a meatware problem. Most of the problems that we are having is not necessarily malware, it's meatware, it's that human sitting behind the keyboard, because they are vulnerable. So we definitely need to be training routinely our employees and just to have an assessment of and making sure that they're aware, and definitely, Mike, the C-levels or the management, to make sure that, because when I have come in on intrusions before, quite frequently, when you're looking at problems, a lot of times it is those senior managers, as you said, that have the easiest passwords, or they've told their IT department, hey, this is really difficult for me to access from home. I need you to help me out here, make it easier. Also, third party. Are you doing business with any third-party companies that have legitimate access into your infrastructure? Well, before you allow someone legitimate access into your infrastructure, are you requiring or encouraging an assessment of their infrastructure? Because we're also seeing a lot of that. Maybe your outer coding is nice and hard. Maybe you've done everything as well as you can, but you have to do business with this subcontractor or what have you, and they have legitimate access into you. They get compromised, and you're the actual real target because they're coming in that way. As far as external consultants, again, I highly recommend them, because after an intrusion or after a compromise occurs, there's going to be a lot of second guessing and speculation. Did you do everything that you can do? And I actually feel that bringing in that external incident response team or assessment team is, I'm not a lawyer, but it's somewhat providing you after the fact a little bit more indemnification that, hey, look, I didn't just have my own people doing an assessment, that somebody could allege that they're compromised or have conflicting interest. I brought in outsides. IR professionals that do this full time. I respect everybody that's doing the job part-time. I respect all the IT professionals, but what you need is somebody that full-time, they live, eat, and breathe incident response. They're seeing the current threat. They're recognizing those indicators that are brand new, not necessarily all the old ones. And as far as when to bring in law enforcement, you know, I've heard a lot of mixed emotions. It's tough to get law enforcement engaged. It's tough to bring them in. There's thresholds. The earlier, the better. The absolute earlier, the better. You just can't bring them in early enough. As far as bringing people in, the moment, when should you bring them in? It's not once you've identified that you've been compromised. For law enforcement, yes, that's when they're going to come in. For those external professionals that are coming in and assessing your infrastructure and doing the incident response, the second that you even suspect that there may be a problem, don't walk down that road, because that's where I see so often this time span go by, where they're looking and they're stepping on all the evidence that law enforcement will subsequently want to use for prosecution, and they're doing the best that they can, but we need to get those external consultants in there. Your internal IT can be shadowing them or following them around, but those external consultants know, generally speaking, the really good ones, that we've got to be not only looking for the compromise, but also preserving that evidence so that when we do get this to a prosecutor, she's going to be able to get action, and our evidence is not going to be stepped on. So.
Thank you, Ovie. And the follow-on question that's critical for a company, a CISO or a CIO to ask concerning external help. And I'm going to ask Ovie this because he's the government neutral party sitting here at the table. If we hire an outside firm to help us with response to an intrusion, what are the top 3 questions that should be asked? And then I'll let the other panelists respond.
Well, how about I just give one and go to the other panelists? I think the first question is what are some of the latest incident response that you've responded to? What you don't want is a company that, well, we haven't responded in the last year to an incident response. We haven't worked one. Are they going to be the best? Maybe they are, but I'd want to know when was your last incident response, major incident response, and how did that go? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Experience, qualifications, things of that nature. I think on top of that, you probably want to look at the methodology and approach to incident response. You know, you want your external incident response providers to bring some calm to the storm, if you will, reduce that panic, and typically a very standard framework for methodology and response is very useful to calming things down, making sure your decisions are very smart, well thought out, if you will. They're not just knee-jerk reactions. Probably the other one I'd add to that is speed. How quickly can the incident response team be deployed? How quickly can they get their technologies deployed to start monitoring the network, start responding to the incident? A lot of times there's a wait list, and so for the firms that are out there, you want to know up front how quickly they can start responding. I think you also want to know if they're going to be on-site or remote. Either one works. It's just important to know that up front.
Thank you. Are there any other comments on that question as to what the top 3 questions should be, Mike?
No, I think we covered them.
We covered. Well, the next question goes to Robert, and that concerns a critical aspect in training and preparation, and that is, what do cyber attack simulation and training exercises look like? What's involved? Who should attend? Should they be off-site, facilitated? How should threat updates be leveraged?
That's a doozy of a question there, Pat. I'd say, what does cyber attack simulations look like? They can be both on-site or off-site. The SANS Institute, like Joe mentioned and Ovie mentioned as well, they have what they call net wars, if you will, and that's where you send your technical folks to training that sort of getting that experience in dealing with intrusions, how to detect it, how to respond to it quickly. There are also trainings you can do internally where there are vendors who will provide sort of non-malicious malware, if you will. I don't know what, Ovie's probably got a name for it. I don't have one. But essentially will simulate malware doing command and control beacons. And it gives you an opportunity to test your team internally, sort of on your home turf, if you will. Those are really valuable. I think the people involved in that can also include your legal counsel, your marketing people, some of your senior managers, and generally anyone else who would be involved in your incident response program, perhaps like IT ops, for example. There was another question buried in there as well.
How should threat updates be sourced and used in an organization as part of that simulation and training?
Oh, gotcha. So for threat updates, I sort of think of threat intelligence updates, threat intel feeds, things of that nature. A lot of it, first and foremost, can and should be sourced through open source intel. That's typically where you're out there gathering from the internet a lot of the research and information that's available. Mike does a lot of good research, and anything that they're out there posting and sharing, you should be aggregating that internally, especially as it relates to your particular industry. There's a lot of blogs out there. If you need to take it to another level from that, there's a lot of trust groups out there, similar to the ones that John South mentioned with the payment card processors and where they share information across an industry. Those are generally very, very valuable. And then I think beyond that, you could look into sourcing it from some of the subscription providers. There's a whole host of them out there now, and they have all sorts of clever names for the threat actors and a lot of cute marketing.
Thank you. So the next question is going to go to Mike. What should the first priority be after a breach? Detailed description of the breach and the data, or how they got in?
I think you should focus mostly on what the potential compromise is. So just because we got breached doesn't mean something significant happened. So understanding what you have and what an actor might want access to is very important. Hopefully you have that idea before you get breached. Like John and some of these other guys have talked about, your posture today should be you're going to get compromised, so it should be a posture of response instead of prevention. So in a posture of response, you should already know what you have of value, what the value is, where it is, and how someone might be able to get access to it. So understanding what might have been compromised is very important. That's going to do several. That's going to lead to several different paths down a decision tree. Is it an automatic? Let's call law enforcement. Is it an automatic regulatory compliance breach? And there's a lot of templates out there today that are risk focused. So in the event of a breach, you start down this decision tree in this risk template that helps you make decisions and take the right path. As far as the response in general, again, a plan is better than, any plan is better than no plan. So understanding who might need to be involved with any type of breach, other assets that you could pull into a response team, whether it's legal, communications, senior management, boards of directors, audit committees, technical people, non-technical people, vendors, law enforcement contacts. And I will note that as a result of a breach isn't the ideal time to make new friends in law enforcement. You should already have those. You should already have a phone number and a name to call. And in the absence of that opportunity, an organization like the Crime Commission, if you've got to contact the Crime Commission, they can push you to the right people, or the InfraGard, or the North Texas Electronic Crimes Task Force. Those are all great organizations that can help you get in touch with the right people.
Thank you, Mike. Joe, what are the top 3 incident response forensic mistakes that are made routinely over and over again?
I would say primarily for most organizations, the first mistake they make is failing to prepare. They fail to plan. They don't know what their capabilities are. They don't know, they don't know what their capabilities are. They don't know what skill sets they have. They usually don't know how to respond. It is basically panic mode, and that is usually when most organizations will call in experts because they realize they're out of their depth. It is the beginning of most frameworks for incident response is preparing, simply because it is vitally important. You need to know who to call, who to get involved, who to bring in, internal counsel, external counsel. It is fundamental to the incident response process for an organization. Secondly, and probably directly relating to that, is going to be failing to collect or preserve evidence data simply because they don't know how to handle it. What we find in most breaches and incident response cases is that people will go in and they will try to start examining systems without understanding the important aspects of how to preserve the data that's on those systems. So they'll stomp all over it, they'll change timestamps of files, they'll drastically reduce the evidentiary data that's on the system. And there are certainly some cases where you go in and you say, okay, our first question is always going to be, what do you suspect? The second question is always, what have you done? And a lot of times that second question, it can be heartbreaking what they've done, because they just didn't know what to do, and they handled things as best as they knew how, which was not very well at all. I would say, and again, that this leads into the third point, failure to bring in experts and law enforcement as soon as possible. If you know you're out of your depth and you suspect that you're compromised, and even if you need to get confirmation that you're compromised, bring in experts immediately. And I know that's kind of self-serving because that's what I do, but I would rather be able to tell you, honestly, what I can do for you and what we can find and what we can use to support a case for you, than to say, I'm sorry, but I think you might have stomped all over the data. I can certainly still look for evidence for you and look for indicators of compromise, the potential that a system has been compromised, what data was exfiltrated. But I need you to understand that, one, that data may not be there anymore. Any volatile artifacts may have been completely destroyed if you decided to reboot the system as one of your first things. So there's certainly a level of due diligence that needs to be undertaken in an intrusion. And so if you don't know what you're doing, don't do anything, call in an expert immediately, especially if you're in Dallas. There are plenty of firms that can help you. I can understand if you're in the middle of nowhere, but here there are definitely people who can help. We're a very small community. We pretty much we know each other anyway between the firms. Call us, one of us, and have us come in and help you.
Ovie, would you like to follow up on what mistakes you see in collecting data after the fact?
I'll just reiterate what Joe said. Absolutely. Most of the time, particularly the internal incident responders, your internal staff, they just don't understand what changes they're making when they're trying to determine whether they're compromised. I would say go for that consultation early on, before you've ever been compromised, and say, hey, look, what is it? Talk with your prosecutor, your law enforcement, those incident response experts, and say, what is it that you are really needing to get this prosecution that you've lost in the last couple of cases? And that way, you know, not just from the prosecutor, but from the external incident response professionals, okay, the very first thing I do, if I even think I've been compromised, I'm imaging that RAM before I start doing my assessment. So at least I have that information, that some of it that I stomped on. And if I did reboot, you know, at least I still have something that we can go back to. So that preservation is critical. Talking early, indemnify yourself, or insure yourself a little bit, so that after the fact you can say, look, I did everything we could have possibly done to prevent this and respond to it, and nobody will be able to allege that you tried to cover it up or keep it inside too long.
Thank you. I think you hit on a very key point, and it was mentioned in one of our panelists' bios, which is live system forensics. And that means live RAM and not just hard drives and other things pulled out of systems in haste.
Absolutely.
So with that, I want to give everybody an opportunity to talk about briefly, we're down to just a few minutes, of what you think a security framework should look like. So we'll start at this end of the table with Joe.
Okay, a couple minutes. So essentially a framework, an information security framework, should basically help you figure out what your current infrastructure and assets looks like, what your posture and maturity level is. It should then allow you to figure out where you need to be. It should provide guidance about where you ultimately should end up. If you're at a low level of maturity, it should give you steps on where to get to the next level of maturity, and eventually a future state of a fairly mature and robust security model. It's going to help you identify and prioritize the steps you need to take to get between those maturity levels, and it should help you figure out how far you're progressing along that maturity state. Beyond that, it should also help you find ways to communicate how this is all going between your stakeholders, whether those are internal or external. And to me, those are the basics of what a framework should look like.
Ovie?
Try to sum it up in less than 5 seconds, which is advanced persistent assessment. Be assessing internal out to out. Know what they're going to have access to, and aggressive egress filtering.
Robert?
Align it to your risk profile. If you're a marketing firm, you don't necessarily need Department of Defense level of security, but if you're processing payment cards and you have hundreds of millions of cards flowing through there, you have a different sort of risk profile.
Well, I think the key is to pick a framework. But prior to that, executive management support. Security is both political and cultural. The more security you introduce to an environment, the more resistance you're going to get. We get a lot of feedback about how open and carefree our environment is. You're going to introduce security and make us all robots. Well, that's not the intent, obviously. So a framework is something you build and you build from. You expand on it. You contract from it depending on. You take from it what you will, depending on your environment. A framework is designed that way. It's not a one-size-fits-all. So look and become aware of the different frameworks that are out there. Find a way to make that fit in your organization. Get executive sponsorship and support for that. When you do start to implement it, make sure your executives are involved with communicating the progress of that. Make sure your framework is measurable, like we talked about. We want to put something in place that we can measure not only the progress, but also the maturity and effectiveness of it. And then, as also was mentioned, it's a continuous process that we have to assess at least annually. Depending on your risk profile, that may be every 6 months or quarterly or even monthly in some cases. So it has to be a process. It will impact your culture, potentially your politics, definitely your people, and it has to be an ongoing cycle, not a one-time event.
Nilo?
Provide a training experience, not just, as I've seen most of the time, check the box. Also, if you have PII, please encrypt your data. And I know we all do backup, but by design, most backup do not encrypt the data. They know that. So once you provide a training experience, it is easier for your employees to remember and test them throughout the year.
Thank you. It's people, processes, infrastructure, hardened systems, and it takes it all working together. I think that our lunch is about to start, and we don't want to keep Secretary Ridge waiting. The gentleman at the panel, I'm sure, will answer any questions that you may have after lunch or during lunch. Thank you for your time.